My family cast me aside for 12 years, solely when they sought money. Now they are demanding that I hand over my whole lottery win. Can you imagine realizing the people who are supposed to love you the most, your own family, only see you as a walking ATM? That's the cold, hard truth that shattered my world, and honestly, the moment I finally opened my eyes to it, everything changed forever. My family, they never called unless they wanted something. My sister, Brittany, needed rent money every 3 months like clockwork. My brother, Todd, he only remembered I existed when his car broke down. And my parents? They'd reach out when their credit cards were maxed out. But when I graduated nursing school, nobody came. When I got promoted to head nurse, I found out through Facebook they'd thrown a party for Todd getting a part-time job at a cell phone store the same week. A job he kept for 2 weeks before quitting because the manager was mean. They lived just 20 minutes away, but I'd see them maybe twice a year, always when they needed cash. Their calls followed a pattern, like a sick script. First, the small talk about the weather or work, then the sob story, then the ask. Brittany would cry about her kids needing clothes, all while posting pictures from her 3rd vacation that year. She'd claim her kids were suffering without organic food, then get her nails done twice a month. Todd would say his back hurt too much to work, but I'd see him playing basketball at the park. He'd tell me disability wouldn't cover his medication, then post videos of himself at the gym. My mom would mention the roof needed fixing while my dad bought another motorcycle, his 6th one. They'd say utilities were getting shut off while planning cruises. And I always gave them money because that's what you do for family, right? That's what I thought. Then, Graham died. She was an old lady from my church who I'd visited every week for years. She left me her house. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place near the river, but it was paid off and had good bones. She specifically told me she wanted me to have it because I was the only one who truly cared. The minute my family found out, they descended like vultures. Brittany said her kids needed a yard and I should let her live there rent-free forever. When I asked about utilities and maintenance, she actually said I should cover that too, since I had such a good job. Todd chimed in, saying he deserved it more because he was the only son, and houses should go to men. He even claimed Graham was probably confused when she made her will. My parents, naturally, suggested I sell it and split the money 4 ways. Of course, they'd keep living in their own house. But when I told them I was moving in myself, they absolutely lost their minds. They called me selfish, greedy, said Graham would be so disappointed. My mom actually said I was stealing from the family. The house Graham left specifically to me, in her will, was somehow stealing. My dad threatened to contest the will until his lawyer told him it would cost thousands and he'd lose. They stopped talking to me for 3 months. No calls, no texts, nothing. And honestly, it was the most peaceful 3 months of my life. No requests for gas money, no emergency loans, no guilt trips about being successful while they struggled. Then Brittany's husband left her, and suddenly, I was family again. She showed up with her kids and their suitcases, expecting to move in. Not asking, expecting. She'd already told the kids about their new rooms. When I said no, she called me heartless and declared her kids would be homeless because of me. She even posted on social media that I was letting babies sleep in cars. She found an apartment the very next day, so apparently not that homeless, but she still told everyone I'd refused to help a single mother in need. Around the same time, Todd wrecked his car while driving drunk and needed bail money. He said I was ruining his life when I refused, claiming he'd lose his job, even though he hadn't worked in 3 years. My parents paid it, then called me crying about their retirement savings. I suggested Todd get a job. My mom hung up on me. My dad left a voicemail calling me a disappointment. Then I won $40,000 on a scratch-off ticket. Not millions, but enough to pay off my student loans and have some left over. I didn't tell anyone, just quietly paid off my debts and put the rest in savings. But my coworker saw me at the lottery office and mentioned it to her sister, who knew Brittany. Within hours, my phone was blowing up. Brittany said her kids needed college funds, not just some money for college, but the entire amount for all 3. Todd said he needed a new car for work, specifically a $35,000 truck, even though he'd been unemployed for 2 years. He actually said the truck would motivate him to find work. My parents? They said I owed them for raising me. The number they came up with was, coincidentally, exactly $40,000. They actually sent me an itemized bill for my childhood: diapers, food, clothes, school supplies, birthday parties, plus interest for the past 15 years. They'd calculated 18 years of expenses and decided I needed to pay them back immediately. My mom even said she'd already picked out a timeshare in Florida with my money. They called a family meeting at my parents' house, making it sound like an emergency. When I walked in, they had a whole presentation about why I should share the money. Brittany had printed out articles about family values and highlighted parts about sharing wealth. She'd made a PowerPoint about her kids' futures being ruined without my money. Todd had a list of his monthly expenses that he needed covered, including 5 streaming services and a gym membership he never used. My parents had retirement brochures for places they wanted to travel: first-class tickets to Europe, luxury resorts, 5-star cruises. They'd already spent my money in their minds. They'd even made a payment schedule where I'd give them each a monthly allowance from my paycheck after the $40,000 was gone. I let them talk for an hour. Just listened. Then I pulled out my own folder. I opened it and spread 12 years of receipts across their coffee table. Every single loan documented with dates and amounts, bank transfers, handwritten checks, Cash App screenshots. My mom's retirement brochure slid to the floor as the papers covered every inch of the table. The room went completely silent. Brittany stopped mid-sentence about family values. Todd's list of monthly expenses hung loose in his hand. My dad leaned forward to look at the first receipt, then the second, then the third. His face changed from confident to confused, to something else I couldn't quite read. My mom picked up a bank statement from 3 years ago, the one where I'd paid their electric bill for 4 months straight. Her hands shook slightly as she set it back down. I'd organized everything, by person, by year, color-coded tabs. Each receipt had a sticky note with the excuse they'd given me at the time. Brittany's rent money from March 2019 had a note that said, "Kids need food." The vacation photos from that same month were printed and stapled to the receipt. Todd's car repair from June 2020 had a note saying, "Back injury prevents work." The basketball tournament photos from that week were attached. I started reading the total out loud. $68,000. Over 12 years. And that's not even counting the countless small amounts I never bothered tracking: the gas money, the grocery runs, the utility payments under $50. Just the big stuff. The emergencies. The crises that couldn't wait. Brittany's face went pale when I mentioned the 18 times I'd paid her rent. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Todd actually looked away when I brought up the 7 cars I'd helped him with. 7 different vehicles in 12 years. Each one supposedly his last request, his final ask, the thing that would turn his life around. My parents tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I pulled out bank statements that showed I gave them money the same months they posted vacation photos. Here's February 2018 when I paid their electric bill. Here's the cruise they took to Mexico that same month. Here's April 2020 when I covered their car payment. Here's Dad's 4th motorcycle purchase 3 weeks later. I showed them the dates I paid their electric bill while Dad bought motorcycle number 4, then 5, then 6. Each purchase documented with screenshots from his social media where he'd bragged about his new rides. Mom tried to say something about family helping family, but I talked right over her. I told them I'd already given them more than the lottery winnings. And unlike your imaginary childhood bill with made-up interest rates, I said, mine has actual proof. Every transaction verified by banks. Every amount confirmed by statements. Brittany started crying, saying I was being cruel. Her voice got high and shaky, like it always did when she didn't get her way. But I reminded her she posted about Disney World the same week she said her kids needed food. I pulled out the printed Facebook posts, her daughter wearing mouse ears, her son on Space Mountain, the caption about making magical memories. The date stamp matched the text message where she'd begged me for grocery money because her kids were going hungry. Todd tried the anger route. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor, yelling that I was calling them liars. His face got red and his voice got loud. But I calmly showed him screenshots of his basketball games dated the same days he claimed his back hurt too much to work. Action shots of him jumping for rebounds, videos of him running down the court. Timestamps that matched his disability claim forms almost exactly. He sat back down and wouldn't look at me. His jaw clenched and unclenched, but he didn't say anything else. My mother attempted the guilt approach. She talked about how family helps family. How I was throwing their love back in their faces. How Graham would be so disappointed to see me keeping score like this. Her voice got soft and hurt, like I was the one being unreasonable. I countered by asking when they last helped me with anything that didn't benefit them directly. The room stayed quiet because there was no answer. I brought up my nursing school graduation that nobody attended. The ceremony where I walked across the stage alone while other students had whole families cheering. I mentioned my promotion celebration I found out about on Facebook after they threw Todd a party for a 2-week cell phone store job. I pulled out the printed post showing their living room decorated with balloons and a banner. The date was 2 days after my promotion. The same promotion I'd texted them about and gotten no response. The room stayed quiet because there was no defense for that. My dad finally spoke up. He said the past was the past. We should focus on moving forward as a family. His voice tried to sound reasonable and calm, like he was the mature one trying to make peace. I agree completely, I said. Moving forward sounds great. Then I explained that moving forward meant no more loans, no more emergency money, and no more guilt trips. Moving forward meant they stopped treating me like an ATM that dispensed cash whenever they pressed the right buttons. Brittany immediately protested that I was abandoning her children. She stood up and pointed at me, her voice shrill. She said I was a terrible aunt, that her kids would suffer because of my selfishness. So I pulled out printed screenshots of her social media showing nail appointments, restaurants, and shopping trips from just the last month. Manicures every 2 weeks at $40 each, dinners at steakhouses, shopping bags from stores that sold $200 jeans, all posted in the last 30 days, all while she claimed she couldn't afford basic necessities for her kids. She stopped talking and stared at the floor. Her face turned red, but not from anger this time. I told them the lottery money was going toward my retirement and my future. Not subsidizing their lifestyle choices anymore. Not funding their vacations while they claimed poverty. Not paying for their luxuries while they guilt-tripped me about family obligations. My mother started crying for real now. Not the manipulative tears she used to get her way. Real tears that made her mascara run. She said I'd changed. That I'd become selfish. That the money had turned me into someone she didn't recognize. I didn't respond to that because we both knew the truth. I hadn't changed at all. I just finally stopped pretending their behavior was normal. I pulled out my phone next and showed them my call log from the last 5 years. Every single incoming call from them highlighted in yellow. Every single one followed within 10 minutes by a text asking for money. Mom's calls about needing help with groceries, then asking for $300. Dad's calls about catching up, then mentioning the mortgage payment. Brittany's calls about the kids, then the rent request. Todd's calls about how he missed me, then the car repair bill. The pattern was so clear that even they couldn't pretend it wasn't there. I scrolled through month after month of the same routine. Call, small talk, crisis, money request, over and over for years. Todd stood up and walked toward me with his hands out, like he was trying to calm down a crazy person. He said he was family, and he'd help me if situations were reversed. His voice sounded reasonable and hurt, like I was being unfair. So, I asked him about my surgery 2 years ago, the one where I had my appendix out and spent 3 days in the hospital. I looked right at him and asked if he remembered calling to check on me, or visiting, or even sending a text. He said he didn't know about it. Just said it flat out like that made it okay. I pulled up Mom's Facebook post from that exact week. The one where she posted a picture from my hospital room asking for prayers. The one where Brittany was tagged in the comments. Todd's face went red, and he sat back down without another word. My father pushed his chair back and stood up. He pointed at the door and told me to leave if I was going to disrespect them in their own home. His voice was loud and final, like he expected me to apologize and beg to stay. I started gathering my folder and papers, stacking them neatly while everyone stared. My hands stayed steady, even though my heart was racing. I tucked everything under my arm and walked toward the front door. Each step felt lighter than the one before. Nobody said anything as I passed through the living room. The retirement brochures were still spread across the coffee table next to Brittany's PowerPoint printouts. All their plans for my money, just sitting there like they'd already won. But they hadn't won anything. I opened the front door and stepped outside into the cool evening air. Brittany followed me out and grabbed my arm before I reached my car. Her crying face disappeared completely. Her voice came out cold and flat when she said, "You'll regret this when you need us someday." She wasn't asking or pleading anymore, just stating what she thought was a fact. I pulled my arm away and looked at her. Really looked at her. I told her I've never needed you because you've never been there. Not for graduations or promotions or surgeries or anything that mattered. I said I was done pretending otherwise. Done pretending their calls were about caring when they were always about cash. Done pretending family meant something to them beyond what I could provide. She stepped back like I'd slapped her. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. I drove straight to Graham's house and pulled into the driveway. Then I just sat there with the engine off. The porch light was on because I'd set it on a timer. The little flower garden Graham had planted was starting to bloom. I kept waiting to feel guilty. Kept waiting for the sick feeling in my stomach that usually came when I disappointed someone. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt relieved. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long, I forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't owe anyone an explanation or money. I didn't have to justify my choices or my savings or my future plans. I got out of the car and went inside. The house was quiet and peaceful. All mine, just like Graham wanted. My phone rang around 8 that evening. It was my friend from nursing school, Kira, who I hadn't talked to in a few weeks. She said Brittany had just posted something on social media about ungrateful family members who abandon people in their time of need. Vague enough to seem innocent, but obvious enough that everyone would know who she meant. I told her everything that happened at my parents' house, the presentation, my folder, the call logs, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said she was proud of me. Said it took guts to stand up to family like that. She said most people would have just given in to keep the peace. But keeping the peace had cost me $68,000 and 12 years of being treated like an ATM. I was done paying that price. The texts started the next day. Mom sent one saying she couldn't believe I'd embarrassed them like that. Dad sent one calling me selfish and ungrateful. Then Mom again, saying they'd sacrificed so much for me. Then Dad saying I was breaking their hearts. Back and forth for 3 days. Guilt trip, anger, guilt trip, anger. I responded once. Just one text saying my boundaries were firm and I wouldn't be discussing money with them anymore. Then I stopped responding. I read each text as it came in, but I didn't reply. Mom sent paragraphs about family loyalty. Dad sent short, angry sentences about respect. Brittany sent nothing, which somehow felt worse than the texts. Todd sent one message asking if I was serious about cutting them off. I didn't answer that either. The manipulation attempts were so clear now, so obvious. I couldn't believe I'd fallen for them for so many years. Then Brittany tried something new. My niece called me crying. She was 9 years old and sobbing about how Mommy was sad and wouldn't stop crying. She asked if I was mad at her and if that's why I wasn't coming over anymore. My heart broke hearing her voice like that. I told her gently that I loved her very much, that I loved all 3 of my nieces, but this was a grown-up problem between the adults and it needed to stay between the adults. She sniffled and asked if I'd come see her soon. I said I would when things calmed down. After I hung up, I texted Brittany, told her using her children to manipulate me was unacceptable. Told her if she wanted to talk to me, she needed to call me herself and leave the kids out of it. She didn't respond. Todd showed up at the hospital on Thursday. I was at the nurse's station finishing charts when security called up. They said someone claiming to be my brother was in the lobby demanding to see me. I told them he was harassing me and I didn't want to see him. Two security guards escorted him out while he yelled about family loyalty loud enough that patients could hear. My supervisor called me into his office afterward. He asked if I was okay and if there was anything the hospital needed to know about. I explained the situation briefly, family drama over money. He nodded and suggested I document everything in case I needed a restraining order later. He said he'd make a note in my file that Todd wasn't allowed on the premises. I thanked him and went back to work. My hands were shaking, but I felt strangely calm. They couldn't even let me work in peace. The email came on Saturday. A long message from my parents with the subject line, "What you owe us?" They listed every single thing they'd done for me as a child, every birthday party, every Christmas present, every school supply. They calculated the cost of raising me and added interest. They said they'd given me life and a home and food and clothing. They said I owed them not just money, but gratitude and respect. They said they were hurt and disappointed. They said Graham would be ashamed of who I'd become. The email went on for pages. I read it twice. Then I saved it in a folder on my computer labeled evidence and didn't respond. Because that's what it was now. Not a relationship, just evidence of a pattern I'd finally learned to recognize. 2 weeks went by with barely any contact from my family. A text here and there saying I was being cruel or asking if I'd changed my mind. I ignored all of them. The silence felt strange at first, like something was missing. But then I realized what was missing was the constant weight of their expectations. I called a financial advisor that Kira recommended. His office was in a small building downtown, and when I walked in, I felt nervous about talking to someone about money. I'd never had enough to actually plan with before. The advisor's name was Mr. Anderson, probably in his 50s, with reading glasses and a calm way of talking that made me relax. I told him about the $40,000, and he didn't act impressed or dismissive, just asked what my goals were. I said I wanted to make sure this money actually helped my future instead of disappearing. He pulled up some charts on his computer and showed me how the money could grow over time if I invested it properly. We set up a retirement account and an emergency fund. He explained that at my age, $40,000 invested now could turn into several $100,000 by retirement. The number seemed impossible, but he showed me the math. For the first time in my life, I was planning for my own security instead of being everyone's backup bank. Walking out of his office, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally done something right for myself. But even with that good feeling, I couldn't shake this weird guilt. I felt relieved about cutting off my family. But then I felt bad about feeling relieved. Shouldn't I miss them? Shouldn't I want to fix things? Kira suggested I talk to someone professional about it. So, I found a therapist named Iris through my insurance. Her office was in a medical building near the hospital. The waiting room had those generic nature paintings and magazines nobody reads. When Iris called me back, she was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with dark hair pulled back and a warm smile. I sat on her couch and didn't know where to start. She asked what brought me in, and I told her the whole story. The 12 years of loans, the lottery win, the family meeting, everything. She listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she said something that surprised me. She said, "Setting boundaries with family doesn't make you a bad person." I'd been waiting for her to tell me I was wrong, that family comes first, no matter what. But instead, she validated everything I'd been feeling. Over the next few sessions, Iris explained concepts I'd never heard of before: financial abuse, enmeshment, triangulation. She described patterns where family members use money to control relationships, and suddenly 12 years of interactions made horrible sense. The way they only called when they needed something, the guilt trips when I said no, the isolation when I set boundaries. I wasn't crazy for feeling used, because I was actually being used. Iris helped me see that my family had trained me to believe my value came from what I could provide them financially. She asked if they'd ever shown interest in my life separate from money. And I couldn't think of a single example. Not one conversation about my work that didn't end with a request for cash. Not one celebration of my achievements that didn't get overshadowed by their needs. Then Kira sent me a link with a text that just said, "You need to see this." It was a GoFundMe page, and the title made my stomach drop. Single mother abandoned by family in time of need. Brittany had created a whole campaign with pictures of her kids and a long story about how her family had cut her off when she needed help most. She made it sound like I'd left her homeless and starving. The description talked about how she was struggling to feed her children and pay rent while her siblings lived comfortably and refused to help. I felt rage building in my chest as I read it. She'd twisted everything to make herself the victim. I wanted to comment and expose all her lies, but I texted Iris first. She called me back within an hour and advised me not to engage publicly. She said, "People like Brittany want a reaction, and the best response is no response. Let her story fall apart on its own." That's exactly what happened. The GoFundMe sat there for a few days and raised maybe $200. Then people started commenting. Someone asked why her Facebook showed regular shopping trips if she couldn't afford food. Another person pointed out the restaurant check-ins and vacation photos. Someone else did the math on her nail appointments and said they cost more than a week of groceries. The comments piled up, questioning her story, and within 3 days, she deleted the whole thing. I didn't have to say a single word. Her own social media contradicted everything she'd claimed, and people saw through it. I felt vindicated watching it disappear. The truth had come out without me having to defend myself. My phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up, and it was my mother, crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said, "Dad was in the hospital with chest pains, and I needed to come right away." My heart jumped, and I asked, "Which hospital?" She said, "Mercy General," and kept crying about how serious it was. I told her I'd call her back and hung up. Then I called Mercy General directly and asked for information about my father. The nurse said he was in the emergency department for indigestion and would be discharged within a few hours. Not a heart attack, not serious, just indigestion. I felt angry that my mother had scared me like that, but also relieved he was okay. This was exactly the kind of manipulation Iris had warned me about, creating fake emergencies to get me to come running. I ordered flowers to be delivered to Dad's room with a card that said, "Hope you feel better soon." Simple and appropriate. I didn't visit, and I didn't offer money. My mother called back an hour later from her regular number, and her voice had changed completely. The crying was gone, and now she was angry. She said I was being cold and heartless. That Dad could have died, and I didn't even care enough to visit. I kept my voice calm and told her I'd confirmed with the hospital that he had indigestion and was discharged. I said sending flowers was appropriate, and I hoped he felt better. She started yelling about family obligation, and I said I had to go and hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt proud of myself for not giving in to the guilt trip. A week later, my parents called together on speakerphone. They had news they wanted to share. Todd had gotten a job at a warehouse. They said it like they expected me to throw a party or something. I could hear the anticipation in their voices, waiting for my reaction. I said that was good news and I hoped it worked out for him. Silence on the other end. My mother asked if that was all I had to say. I asked what else they wanted me to say. More silence. My father cleared his throat and said they thought I'd be happy for my brother. I said I was happy he found work. The conversation died after that. Nobody knew what to say when I didn't offer money or excessive praise. We said awkward goodbyes and hung up. 3 weeks went by, and my phone rang with Todd's name on the screen. I considered not answering, but curiosity won. He sounded friendly, almost normal, asking how I was doing. I said I was fine and asked how the warehouse job was going. He said it was good, but he had a small problem. Here we go. He said he needed to borrow money for work boots and gas until his first paycheck came through. The steel-toe boots cost $80, and he needed about $60 for gas. I felt that old familiar pressure to say yes. But then I thought about everything Iris had taught me. I told him no. He asked what I meant, and I said I wasn't lending money to family anymore. He got quiet, then said he really needed this for work. I suggested he ask our parents since they were so concerned about family helping family. He said they didn't have it right now. I said that sounded like something he needed to figure out with them or his employer. He called me selfish and hung up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling guilty, but also knowing I'd done the right thing. The pattern had to break somewhere, and it was breaking right here. A few days later, Brittany's ex-husband sent me a Facebook message out of nowhere. The notification popped up while I was eating lunch at work, and I stared at his profile picture for a minute before opening it. He'd moved to another state after the divorce, and I hadn't heard from him in over a year. The message was long, asking what really happened with the family and saying Brittany told him I'd abandoned everyone over money. He said he knew there had to be more to the story because I'd always been reasonable when he knew me. I read it twice, then closed the app without responding. It wasn't my job to explain my boundaries to people who weren't there for any of it. He could believe whatever version Brittany told him. I went back to my sandwich and didn't think about it again. That weekend, Kira invited me to dinner with some of her other friends at a Thai place downtown. I almost said no because meeting new people made me nervous. But then I realized that was exactly why I should go. Her friends turned out to be normal people who worked regular jobs and had regular problems. We talked about a TV show everyone was watching, complained about traffic, and shared stories about weird customers and difficult coworkers. One woman told a funny story about her cat getting stuck behind the washing machine. Another guy talked about learning to make bread during lockdown and how his first 3 attempts turned into rocks. Nobody asked me for anything. Nobody hinted about needing help or mentioned financial struggles while showing off expensive purchases. It was just people enjoying each other's company and having conversation. I couldn't remember the last time I'd sat at a table and not felt like an ATM with a face. When the check came, everyone split it evenly without drama or someone conveniently forgetting their wallet. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. My birthday came around in early April. A card showed up in my mailbox from my parents with a local postmark. Inside was a long note written in my mother's careful handwriting about how family is forever and grudges hurt everyone. She wrote about forgiveness and moving forward and not letting money come between people who love each other. The card went on for 3 paragraphs about the importance of blood ties and how she hoped I'd reconsider my harsh stance. There was no money in the card, which struck me as funny, given they were asking me to forget about money being an issue. They'd sent me birthday cards with cash or gift cards every year since I turned 16, but this year they sent guilt instead. I set the card on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a while. Part of me wanted to feel bad. Part of me wanted to call them and apologize and make everything okay again. But then I remembered the itemized bill and the PowerPoint presentation and Todd's list of streaming services he expected me to pay for. I sent a text thanking them for the birthday wishes, just 2 sentences. I didn't address anything else in the card. Didn't acknowledge the guilt trip or change any of my boundaries. When I told Iris about it during my next session, she smiled and said that was real progress, acknowledging without engaging, taking what was genuine and leaving the manipulation behind. She said most people either ignore completely or get sucked back into the pattern. But I'd found a middle path that kept the door open for genuine connection while protecting myself from exploitation. I wasn't sure I deserved that much credit for 2 sentences, but it did feel good to respond on my own terms. Todd quit the warehouse job 5 weeks after he started. My mother called to tell me like it was breaking news. She said the manager was unreasonable for expecting him to show up on time consistently, and Todd couldn't work in that kind of negative environment. I listened to her explain how the manager had it out for him, and how the shift times kept changing, and how Todd's back was acting up again. Anyway, when she finally stopped talking, I said that was unfortunate and changed the subject to the weather. There was a long pause on her end. She'd clearly expected me to offer sympathy or suggest I could help him with rent until he found something else. Instead, I asked if they'd gotten much rain lately because we'd had storms all week. She answered about the weather for a minute, then made an excuse to get off the phone. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, but I didn't chase after it. Brittany started posting inspirational quotes on Facebook about toxic family members and cutting off negative people. The first one showed up on a Tuesday morning, some graphic with flowers and script text about how sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who share your blood. Kira screenshotted it and sent it to me with 3 laughing emojis. By Friday, there were 4 more posts about Setting boundaries with takers and recognizing when people only want to use you. Each one got a dozen likes and sympathetic comments from people who had no idea what the actual situation was. Kira and I met for coffee on Saturday and looked through them together, laughing at the complete lack of self-awareness. Here was Brittany, who'd asked me for rent money 18 times while posting vacation photos, calling me toxic for refusing to fund her lifestyle anymore. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Kira said we should make a drinking game out of it, take a shot every time Brittany posted something about toxic people. I told her I'd be drunk by noon. 3 months after the family meeting, I got called into my supervisor's office at the hospital. Milo asked me to close the door and sit down, and my stomach dropped, thinking I was in trouble for something. Instead, he told me they were promoting me to senior charge nurse with a significant raise and expanded responsibilities. I'd be overseeing the entire night shift and training new hires. The raise was almost $15,000 more per year. I sat there staring at him for a second before managing to say thank you. He said I'd earned it through my work ethic and leadership skills, and the promotion was effective immediately. I called Kira from my car during lunch break, and she screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I told my coworkers that afternoon, and they congratulated me and took me out for drinks after our shift. I didn't mention it to my family. It felt good to have success that was just mine, without anyone trying to claim a piece of it or figure out how it benefited them. My parents found out about the promotion anyway. Someone from their church knew someone who worked in the hospital administration, and word traveled fast in small communities. They called me on a Sunday afternoon, both of them on speakerphone again. They congratulated me and said how proud they were and asked about my new responsibilities. The conversation felt almost normal for about 5 minutes. Then my father cleared his throat and asked if this meant I could help Todd with his rent now that he was unemployed again. Just like that, the real reason for the call came out. I felt that old familiar pressure building in my chest. The instinct to say yes and make everyone happy and keep the peace. But I'd been working with Iris for months now, and I knew what healthy boundaries looked like. I thanked them for the congratulations and told them my raise was going toward my own goals. My mother started to say something, but I talked over her, explaining I had to go and I'd talk to them later. I ended the call before she could launch into a guilt trip. My hands were shaking when I set the phone down. 10 minutes later, a text came through from my mother saying I'd become hard-hearted and money had changed me. I read it twice, then set my phone face down on the table. I didn't respond. Iris had taught me that not every accusation deserves a defense, and some statements are designed purely to provoke a reaction. I made myself a sandwich and watched TV, and didn't pick up my phone again until the next morning. For months had passed since the family meeting where I'd spread my receipts across their coffee table. I was sleeping through the night without waking up anxious about money or guilty about saying no to someone. My savings account was actually growing instead of draining every time someone had an emergency. I'd stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, worried about what crisis would need my immediate financial attention. During my session with Iris that week, she pointed out that my stress levels had noticeably decreased since setting boundaries. She said it showed in my posture, my voice, even the way I talked about my daily life. I wasn't constantly braced for the next demand or preparing excuses for why I couldn't help. I was just living my life and enjoying the parts of it that used to feel like obligations. She asked how that felt, and I had to think about it for a minute. It felt like breathing easier. It felt like the weight I'd been carrying for 12 years had finally started to lift. Thanksgiving morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Brittany. It was long, probably took her 20 minutes to type. All about how her kids kept asking why I wasn't coming to dinner, and she didn't know what to tell them. She said they were confused and hurt and didn't understand why their aunt didn't want to see them on the holidays. She made it sound like I was breaking their hearts on purpose. I read it twice, recognized the guilt trip for what it was, and typed back a simple response. I told her she could tell them the truth, that grown-ups sometimes need space to have healthy relationships, and that I loved them, but needed boundaries with their mother. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. She didn't respond, which was probably for the best. I got dressed and drove to Kira's parents' house across town, carrying the pumpkin pie I'd made the night before. Her mom answered the door and pulled me into a hug without asking any questions about my family situation. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing, and everything felt warm and easy. Kira's dad asked me about work and actually listened to my answer. Her brother talked about his new job, and nobody demanded money or made passive-aggressive comments. When someone asked me to pass the potatoes, that was literally all they wanted, just the potatoes. No hidden agenda, no guilt trip attached, just a simple request at a normal family dinner. I helped clear plates and wash dishes and laughed at stories about Kira's childhood. And I realized this was the most relaxed I'd felt on a holiday in over 10 years. Nobody mentioned my lottery win or asked how much I made or suggested I should be doing more for people who needed help. It was just people enjoying each other's company because they actually liked each other, not because they wanted something. 2 weeks later, my phone rang with my dad's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. He got straight to the point. No small talk this time. Todd had been evicted from his apartment for not paying rent for 3 months. My father asked if Todd could stay in Graham's spare room temporarily, just until he got back on his feet. I said no immediately. Didn't even pause to think about it. The silence on the other end lasted maybe 5 seconds before Dad's voice came back cold and angry. He said I was letting my brother be homeless out of spite, that I had a whole extra room sitting empty while my own blood slept in his car. I could hear my mother crying in the background, the same performance she'd given 100 times before. I reminded Dad that Todd was a grown man with options and choices. I said temporary always becomes permanent with this family, that I'd watched it happen over and over. I told him Todd could figure out his own housing like every other adult in the world. Dad called me heartless and hung up. 3 days later, I saw on Facebook that Todd had moved onto my parents' couch. My mother posted about how family takes care of family with a picture of Todd's stuff piled in their living room. I didn't comment or react, just scrolled past. That's exactly where his choices had led him, and I wasn't going to feel guilty about it. A week after that, a notification popped up on my phone. Brittany's oldest daughter had sent me a friend request on social media. Her name was Emma, and she was 14 now. I stared at the request for a while, thinking about whether accepting it would open a door I'd just closed. But I did love my nieces, even if their mother drove me crazy. I accepted the request and sent Emma a short message saying I was glad to connect with her. I made a mental note to be available to her and her sisters without enabling Brittany's manipulation. I could love my nieces and still have boundaries with their mother. Those two things didn't cancel each other out. Emma posted pictures of school events and friends and normal teenage stuff. I liked her posts and commented occasionally, keeping things light and supportive. Brittany never mentioned it, which meant she probably didn't know or didn't care as long as I wasn't sending money. My parents tried a new approach in early December. My mother sent a text asking if I'd be willing to attend family counseling to work through our issues. She sent a link to a therapist's website and said they'd already called to set up an appointment. They just needed me to confirm. I read the message 3 times, looking for the catch. The therapist's office was 40 minutes from my house, but 5 minutes from theirs. The appointment was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon when I'd normally be working. They'd made all these plans without asking me first, just assuming I'd rearrange my life to accommodate them. I texted back declining the invitation. I explained I was already in therapy and working through things just fine on my own. My mother called immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. She left a long message about how individual therapy was making me selfish and we needed family therapy to heal together. I deleted the voicemail and blocked the therapist's number in case they tried to call me directly. Christmas was coming, and I knew it would be a disaster. Sure enough, my mother sent a group text to me, Brittany, and Todd about gift expectations and dinner plans. She wrote it like nothing had changed, like we were all one big happy family getting together to celebrate. She assigned everyone dishes to bring and set a budget for gifts and said dinner would be at 5 o'clock sharp. I read through the whole message, watching the little dots appear as Brittany and Todd typed their responses, confirming they'd be there. Then I typed my own response. I said I'd be spending Christmas elsewhere this year and hoped they had a nice time. The group chat exploded within seconds. Brittany sent 4 messages back to back about how I was ruining Christmas for the kids. Todd called me dramatic and said I was being ridiculous over nothing. My parents said I was tearing the family apart and breaking their hearts. The messages kept coming, dozens of them. Everyone piling on with their opinions about my selfishness and cruelty. I read enough to get the general theme, then muted the group chat and texted Kira asking if her Christmas invitation was still open. She responded immediately saying yes and that her family was excited to have me. I spent the next week shopping for my nieces online, picking out age-appropriate gifts that I knew they'd actually like, books and art supplies for Emma, a science kit for the middle one, stuffed animals for the youngest. I had everything shipped directly to Brittany's apartment with cards that said I loved them and was thinking of them. I didn't send money or gift cards, just actual thoughtful presents. Brittany texted me 2 days later saying the gifts weren't enough and I should have sent money so the girls could buy what they really wanted. She said I was being cheap and the girls were disappointed. I didn't respond because her text perfectly illustrated exactly why I'd set boundaries in the first place. She couldn't just let me have a relationship with my nieces without trying to extract money from it. Kira called me a few days before Christmas to confirm plans. I told her I was nervous about intruding on her family's holiday. She laughed and said her parents had already set a place for me and her mom was excited to have another person to feed. She said they had plenty of room and plenty of food and I should stop worrying. It hit me then that this was the first Christmas in years where I wasn't stressed about money or guilt trips or trying to make everyone happy while they complained I wasn't doing enough. I wasn't dreading the holiday or making excuses or preparing myself for criticism. I was actually looking forward to it. I thanked Kira and she told me to bring my appetite and nothing else. That her family didn't expect gifts or contributions, just my company. Christmas morning, I woke up in Graham's house and made coffee in her old percolator. The phone sat on the counter, silent, until around noon when it buzzed with a voicemail. I recognized Mom's number and let it go to voicemail while I ate leftover pie from the night before at Kira's place. The message notification sat there for an hour before I finally listened. Mom's voice came through, shaky and wet with tears, talking about the empty chair at their dinner table and how disappointed Graham would be if she could see me now. She said the whole family was heartbroken that I chose to abandon them on Christmas of all days. She mentioned how Graham always valued family togetherness and I was spitting on her memory by staying away. The message went on for 3 minutes with her voice breaking at strategic moments, building up to asking if I'd at least call back so they knew I was okay. I saved the voicemail in a folder with all the others and went back to my coffee. The manipulation was so obvious now that I'd started seeing it clearly. Graham wouldn't be disappointed in me for protecting myself from people who only wanted my money. She'd left me the house specifically because she knew exactly what they were like. I had a therapy session with Iris scheduled for the day after Christmas. Her office was quiet, with most of the building closed for the holiday week. I told her about the voicemail and the family group chat explosion and spending Christmas with Kira's family instead. Iris listened and took notes, then asked how I felt about missing Christmas with my blood relatives. I said I felt relieved more than anything, which made me feel guilty for feeling relieved. She pointed out that grief isn't always about death. That sometimes we grieve the family we wish we had while accepting the reality of the family we actually have. We spent the rest of the session talking about the difference between the parents I wanted and the parents who actually raised me. The ones who came to Todd's cell phone store job party but skipped my nursing school graduation. The ones who bought motorcycles while claiming they couldn't afford their electric bill. Iris said this acceptance work was painful but necessary, that I couldn't heal from something I refused to acknowledge. By the end of the session, I felt exhausted, but somehow lighter, like I'd been carrying something heavy without realizing it. January hit cold and clear, and I decided to focus on myself instead of family drama. The hospital posted information about a critical care certification course that would advance my career even further. The program ran 6 months with classes twice a week, plus clinical rotations. I filled out the application sitting at Graham's kitchen table and submitted it before I could talk myself out of it. The course cost $3,000, but my lottery money and the raise from my promotion meant I could actually afford it without stress. I got accepted within 2 weeks and classes started in February. Kira was excited when I told her, saying I'd been talking about getting certified for years, but always put it off because family needed money. She was right. I'd delayed my own goals repeatedly to fund everyone else's problems. Todd got hired at a shipping warehouse in early January. My parents called to tell me like it was major news, their voices bright with hope that he'd finally found his path. I said that was good and meant it, but I didn't offer money for work clothes or gas or anything else. 3 weeks later, Kira texted me asking if I'd heard about Todd quitting already. I hadn't heard anything from my parents this time. She said her cousin, who worked at the same warehouse, mentioned Todd had walked out mid-shift after arguing with his supervisor about his phone use. Apparently, the supervisor told him phones weren't allowed on the warehouse floor, and Todd said that was ridiculous and left. The fact that my parents didn't even bother telling me felt like progress somehow. They were starting to accept that I wasn't their backup plan anymore. Brittany posted a long rant on Facebook in mid-January. She didn't name names, but everyone who knew our family could tell exactly who she meant. The post talked about family betrayal and people who abandon their blood relatives over money. She wrote about how some people value dollars more than relationships and how sad it was that greed could destroy families. She said her kids were learning hard lessons about who they could count on and who would let them down. The post got a bunch of sympathetic comments at first. People saying they were sorry she was going through that and family should stick together. Then other people started commenting with screenshots of her own Facebook posts. Her nail appointments and restaurant check-ins and shopping hauls, all dated from the same week she'd claimed her kids were suffering. Someone pointed out she'd posted about a weekend trip to an indoor water park the same week she'd said she couldn't afford groceries. The post got messy fast with people arguing in the comments. Brittany ended up deleting the whole thing, but not before multiple people had screenshotted it. I sat in Iris's office the following week and realized something had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore when I thought about my family. The rage that used to burn in my chest when my phone rang had faded into something quieter and sadder. I told Iris I kept thinking about what could have been if they'd valued me as a person instead of a bank account. If they'd come to my graduation or celebrated my promotion or visited me in the hospital after my surgery. If Brittany had ever called just to talk instead of only when she needed rent money. If Todd had ever asked how I was doing instead of only reaching out when his car broke down. Iris nodded and said this acceptance was a major milestone in the healing process. She said anger was often easier than grief because anger gave us something to fight against. Grief meant accepting loss and accepting that the family I'd wanted had never actually existed. It meant letting go of the hope that they'd change and see me differently. That hurt worse than the anger ever had. My parents reached out in March with a text saying they wanted to rebuild our relationship with no expectations. The message was short and seemed genuine, saying they missed me and wanted to work on being a real family. I was skeptical, but Iris had been talking about being open to change while maintaining boundaries. I agreed to meet them for coffee at a place downtown, somewhere public and neutral. I got there first and ordered my drink, then waited at a table by the window. They arrived together and hugged me, which felt awkward, but not hostile. We made small talk about work and weather and the coffee shop itself. Dad asked about the house and if I was settling in okay. Mom mentioned she'd been thinking about Graham a lot lately. For the first 20 minutes, it actually felt normal, like we were just family catching up without any ulterior motives. Then Mom shifted in her seat and her voice changed to that concerned tone I recognized from 1,000 phone calls. She said she'd been talking to Brittany, who was really struggling with her electric bill this month. She said the kids were scared the power would get shut off, and it was only $200. But Brittany had no way to come up with it. She looked at me with those pleading eyes and said she knew I'd set boundaries, but surely I could see this was different because it involved the kids. I felt my stomach drop as the real reason for the meeting became clear. I stood up and put my coat on while they were still talking. I thanked them for their time and said I needed to leave. Mom started protesting that we hadn't finished talking, but I was already walking toward the door. Dad called after me asking where I was going, but I didn't turn around. I sat in my car in the parking lot and pulled out my phone. I texted both of them explaining that I was open to a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine care, but not one based on financial transactions. I said when they were ready to see me as a daughter instead of a wallet, I'd be happy to try again. I hit send and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. No response came. I drove home to Graham's house and sat in her kitchen drinking tea from her old mugs. The silence from my phone told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. They didn't want a relationship with me. They wanted access to my money. The difference between those two things had never been clearer. Kira called me the next evening and asked how I was doing. I told her about the coffee meeting disaster, and she sighed, but didn't sound surprised. She said she'd been thinking about something and wanted to run it by me. She asked when the last time was that I'd taken a real vacation, not just a long weekend or time off to help someone else with their crisis. I thought about it and realized it had been 5 years since I'd gone anywhere just for myself. Kira said I should use some of my lottery money to actually do something fun instead of just saving it all. She suggested a beach resort she'd been to before, somewhere warm where I could read and relax and not think about family drama for a week. The idea sounded amazing, but also guilty, like I shouldn't spend money on myself when I'd refused to give it to my family. Kira must have heard the hesitation in my voice because she said the whole point of setting boundaries was so I could live my own life. I looked up the resort that night and found a week in April that would work with my schedule. I booked it without telling anyone in my family, then felt a rush of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. The beach resort turned out to be perfect. I spent the first 2 days doing absolutely nothing but lying on a lounge chair with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. The ocean made this constant sound that blocked out everything else. And for the first time in forever, I wasn't checking my phone every 10 minutes, waiting for someone to need something. I walked on the beach in the mornings before it got too hot and ate meals whenever I felt like it without having to coordinate with anyone else's schedule. By day 3, I started thinking about what I actually wanted my life to look like instead of just reacting to everyone else's demands. I made lists in a notebook I'd bought at the resort gift shop, writing down goals that had nothing to do with helping other people or proving anything to my family. When I got back home a week later, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd put down a heavy bag I'd been carrying so long I forgot it was there. The house felt peaceful when I walked in, and I realized this was the first time I'd come home from a trip without worrying about what crisis would be waiting for me. 2 days after I got back, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Todd's voice came through before I could say hello, talking fast about this certification program that would totally change his life and get him back on track. He needed $2,000 to enroll, and the class started next week, so he had to know right now if I'd help. I waited until he finished his whole pitch, then told him calmly that I wasn't lending money to family anymore. Not as a punishment, but as a boundary I needed for my own well-being. I suggested he look into financial aid or payment plans since most programs offered those options. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he started yelling about how I was still holding grudges and punishing him for past mistakes when he was trying to better himself. I kept my voice steady and explained that protecting myself from repeated patterns wasn't holding a grudge. It was learning from experience. I told him I hoped the program worked out for him and that I genuinely wanted him to succeed, but I couldn't be his funding source anymore. He called me selfish and said I was just like everyone else who gave up on him. Then the line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone for a minute, waiting for the guilt to hit, but it didn't come. I felt sad for him, but not responsible, which was a new feeling I was still getting used to. A few weeks later, a card showed up in my mailbox with flowers on the front and Happy Mother's Day written in fancy script. I opened it, confused since I wasn't a mother, and found a note from Brittany inside. She'd written about how hard she was working as a single mom without any family support and how her kids were learning that family wasn't always there when you needed them. The whole thing was clearly designed to make me feel guilty, hitting all the usual points about struggling and sacrifice and doing her best alone. I read it twice, recognizing every manipulation technique she'd used over the years, then walked straight to my recycling bin and dropped it in without responding. My phone stayed in my pocket, and I didn't type out a single defensive text. The cart sat in the recycling for trash day, and I never thought about it again. I reached out to my oldest niece through social media and asked if she and her sisters wanted to have dinner with me. We met at a casual restaurant near their school, just the four of us, without Brittany around to orchestrate everything. They seemed nervous at first, but relaxed once they realized I wasn't going to lecture them or ask weird questions about their mom. We talked about school and friends, and the oldest one showed me pictures of her art project that had won an award. They were all doing fine, wearing clean clothes and talking about normal kid stuff like upcoming field trips and basketball tryouts. I realized while watching them laugh over their chicken fingers that Brittany's dramatic social media posts about their suffering had been exaggerated for sympathy. They weren't starving or struggling or traumatized. They were just regular kids dealing with their parents' divorce like lots of kids do. When I dropped them off afterward, the youngest gave me a hug and asked if we could do it again sometime. I said yes and meant it, understanding now that I could have a relationship with them without enabling their mother. Work kept getting better, and my savings account grew steadily each month without anyone draining it. I started having lunch with coworkers who invited me to things outside the hospital, like a book club and a hiking group. These friendships felt different because nobody wanted anything from me except my company. When I showed up, people seemed genuinely happy to see me, not relieved that their backup plan had arrived. I told Iris about all of this during our next session, and she smiled in that way therapists do when they're proud of you, but trying not to make it weird. She said I was doing remarkably well and suggested we could transition to monthly sessions instead of weekly, since I seemed to have solid coping strategies in place. The idea of not needing therapy every week felt like graduation somehow, proof that I was actually getting healthier instead of just surviving. 5 months had passed since the family meeting at my parents' house, and I found myself genuinely happy in a way I couldn't have imagined back then. I still loved my family in some complicated way I couldn't fully explain. But I'd accepted that loving them didn't mean funding their dysfunction or accepting their manipulation. They were who they were, and I couldn't change that by giving them more money or more chances or more of myself. I could only change how I responded to them, what I allowed, what boundaries I maintained. Some days were harder than others, and I still felt twinges of guilt when I saw Brittany's posts about single motherhood or heard through mutual connections that Todd was struggling again. But the guilt didn't control me anymore, and I didn't rush to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I started making actual plans for my future with confidence I'd never had before. The lottery win hadn't just been $40,000 that paid off my loans and gave me a cushion. It had been the thing that forced everything into the open. The catalyst that helped me recognize my worth wasn't measured by what I could give others, but by how I valued and respected myself. I sat in Graham's kitchen one evening, drinking tea from her old mugs, and understood finally why she'd left me the house. She'd seen something in me that I hadn't seen in myself yet. She knew I was the one who would appreciate it for what it was, not what it could be converted into cash. I was the one who visited her because I wanted to, not because I needed something. She'd been teaching me all along that real love doesn't come with invoices and payment schedules. I wished I could tell her I finally got it, that her house had become my home, and her lesson had become my foundation. The lottery money would run out eventually, but what I'd learned about myself and my worth would last forever. So, what do you think? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family like this? Or face that moment where you realize the dynamics were completely skewed? I'd really love to hear your stories or thoughts in the comments below.